Well, tell everybody, a lot of people, we know what it is. Tell everybody who OPR is and why that is such an important set of acronyms.
So it's the Office of Professional Responsibility. It's basically DEA's Federal Internal Affairs Unit, right? So I'm down there with the DEA stuff on, in violation, trying to help. But so's this guy, by the way, right? So he's the investigator. So he looks at me and I look at him and there's just this moment between us and he looks at me and says, you didn't see me and I didn't see you.
There you go.
And then we both went back and we're again carrying body parts out of the rubble. But that's who DEA hires, just people who want to do the right thing. And I mean, law enforcement around the country is like that too. And it wasn't just law enforcement, by the way. Like over those days when we were digging, there were lines of people like electricians and contractors and people who threw their tools in their truck and drove from all over. People from Ohio, people from the middle of the country drove to the World Trade Center to help. I mean, it was the most touching thing I ever saw. You're talking about hundreds of people lined up waiting to get into the site just to try to help. And this was a nasty site, right? I mean, there heavy metals in the air. And I mean, it was nasty. But people came to help because that's what Americans do.
Yep.
Did you develop any long-term effects out of that? Because I know we've talked with several people, and we had guys on the podcast, NYPD guys lost. We still continue to lose people because of some of the materials and stuff that was breathed in. Have you had any health issues from that?
Nothing I can point to that came from that. So I've been pretty lucky. After that, like DEA volunteered, like we were really just for months we were trying to get involved and doing things on our own. I was working like on my own time with like the FBI. I was in the search for the black box, and things like that, because I just volunteered wherever we could volunteer. We did. But at one point, DEA joined the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is the FBI-led counterterrorism unit in New York. And DEA, they had like a warehouse that was within a few blocks of the World Trade Center. It was up by Chelsea, right near our office. And they had like all the different units. There were all the federal agencies that were there, and everyone had given some officers and agents, volunteered them for this mission. And DEA was given the job of like going to the storage units, because I mean everyone thought there were more attacks coming, right? And that had been the plan. And so we were supposed to be searching these units, and we had a list of names and looking if we could find anything that was affiliated with them. And I was with Joe Jimenez, and he pronounces his name wrong. He was another agent that was there, really, really good guy. And the two of us were going around with this list of names, just checking on the storage units to see if we could find someone affiliated with the hijackers. And everyone was worried about a weapon of mass destruction. But what we did was we went way beyond just checking names, right? With the management, we were doing what DEA does and being proactive. Hey, who have you seen here? Anybody suspicious? Have you seen people who are coming at odd hours? All those kinds of questions. And then we were going, and we ended up identifying a storage unit that had been rented by this Lebanese guy, and he had fled right after the attacks back to Lebanon. And so the guy, he'd abandoned his thing essentially. So the guy let us search it, and we found precursors for drugs and in his unit. And I ended up getting him on the phone. I think he was in Beirut, and I ended up getting him on the phone and telling him, hey, we have a more important mission here than a few drugs. You know what I mean? Like, what can you tell us? How can you help us? And then I used that contact to find a couple of people who were affiliated with him. And Joe and I talked to those two people, asking him, listen, all that we care about right now is terrorism. What can you do? Because we're trying to develop sources. That's another thing DEA does, right? You could drop a DEA agent on the moon, and he's going to come up with a source network in a short period of time. So, and then that led to them saying, we were at a party, and somebody mentioned one of the guys there was bragging that he'd driven the hijackers around when they came. It was in an apartment complex. So we identified it in New Jersey, and Joe and I went out there, identified this guy who claimed to be part of the hijackers, found his car, and we worked with the FBI to put eyes on this thing. And then we eventually identified him and found out that he was in custody for some immigration violation. So he'd already been picked up. So we went to the FBI with the FBI, two agents to interview this guy. And it had taken us a while to get to him too. I remember we were interviewing one of the people who'd hosted this party, right, where this guy claiming to be one of the hijackers was there. And I'm talking to him, and he's obviously lying to me, right? This is with DEA. You're interviewing people. You understand when people are lying to you. He's lying. And I'm going through, who do you know from this region? Who do you know? All these, just drawing this huge map of his information so I could pick out the lies, and then going in circles and trying to trip him up. And he was lying like crazy. So, at one point I had him, he gave me his phone book, and I was going through it. I'm like, what about this guy? You didn't tell me about this guy, And I got a little heated with him, and I said, you know what? We're in the federal investigation right now. We're working with the JTTF. We're doing a terrorism case, and you're lying to me, and that's a violation of federal law. And I got a little. And while I'm doing that with him, the two FBI agents got up and walked out. And so my partner Joe's there. I'm like, go see what's going on. So he goes out with them. So anyhow, this guy gives up the name of this guy. So we end up finding the guy that we believe drove the hijackers around. And I went back outside and we talked to the FBI agents, and I said, Joe, what's up? What's going on with them? And they said, oh, they feel like you're yelling at him. You're being too mean.
What?
I swear to God.
You hurt a couple agents' feelings, or what?
I heard they thought I was hurting the feelings of the guy who was covering and lying to me about the identity of a man who drove the hijackers around.
3,000 people died. They declared war on us. I really don't give a shit about somebody's feelings at this point.
Yeah, but in fairness to the FBI agents, when you work in same thing with like being a cop, right? If you work in an area with very little crime, you have a different mindset than if you're working in the projects in a place where you're getting shot at and fighting for your life all the time. And what we did proactively with DEA, we were constantly arresting people. I think DEA arrests something like, I don't remember the number. It's a huge percentage compared to like the comparable, like the FBI is bigger. I think at least 10 or 12 times bigger. And DEA, I believe, arrests more people every year, so it's very proactive. So I did a lot of interviews. I arrested in my first few years when I was in the New York division, I arrested over 100 people on my cases. This was my first 4 years with them, And so, I knew how to talk to people, and I'd been a cop. I knew how to interview and suss out lies, and and so they just weren't used to that. It was a little more political. And I've worked with FBI guys all over the world on their fly teams. I worked with the hostage rescue team. We did an operation with them. I've worked with a lot of really great FBI agents. So I'm not digging on them. But these two guys who were assigned to this interview with me weren't used to that level of aggression, but it worked. And we ended up finding this guy and identifying him. I interviewed the guy who claimed he'd driven the hijackers around. And I mean, in the end, the FBI took over from that point with him. And in the end, he was just removed from the country for these violations. He was to my knowledge, he was never charged with anything.
Well, that's I was about to ask you. Even though he was never charged, were they able to establish any kind of a link with the hijackers at all that you know of?
Not that I know of, but I mean, like when we searched his car, we found flight manuals from a local airport where they were looking at taking flying lessons, and they'd been using a flight simulator in one of the apartments that we located. There was a bunch of stuff.
We call that a clue in law enforcement.
Yeah, but it's frustrating. Yeah, and everybody's in law enforcement knows this too. Sometimes a guy is dirty, but you can't get him. And there are agents because of the terrorism connection to this. I mean, I was supposed to be there with Joe checking storage unit registrations, and so we were like 8 levels away from that just to find this guy in the first place. But that's what proactive law enforcement does, and that's why later I really pushed DEA to get us more involved.
Yeah. But Jeff, if you don't do that, then shit like this doesn't get done. It's always, you know what I found out too? It's the cops. You think back to your street days. I don't want to make that one more stop. I just really want to go home. Well, you make that one more stop, and then it gets you something, not just a little case, but it's like you recover a kidnapping victim. You make a arrest on a homicide suspect. I mean, it's always that one little extra step that always seems to pay dividends,
100%. Like I think I gave out maybe 2 tickets when I was in patrol, but I used to pull people over for traffic violations all the time.
Well, you never would have made it as a state trooper, pal. I got to tell you.
No, I wouldn't. But I wasn't. I was in a really high crime area, and what I was looking for was guns and warrants, and and other
take bad guys and girls off the street.
Yeah, exactly. And that was just really a tool to do that.
Well, if you think back when after 9/11, how it really galvanized the whole United States. I was in D.C. I was in special operations at the time. You couldn't, Morgan, you know how it was up there going down the toll road. You couldn't go under a bridge that didn't see several U.S. flags hanging off. Everybody had them tied to their antennas on their cars. And so back to your point where you're interviewing these guys, the whole United States is wanting law enforcement to take the gloves off. Let's get these guys back. Let's give them their due reward here. They've earned this.
It's the only thing terrorists understand is force. It's the only thing they understand.
Yeah, they don't. It's aid packages, and platitudes, doesn't work. And it's like I didn't have the experience you did. I was in the Reagan building on 9/11. We were supposed to be at the Pentagon in the afternoon, and I'm like you. I see that first plane hit the tower, and I'm like, because we're seeing it on TV, said we got to get out of here. Then the second plane hits. DC's a complete mess. And then I remember it's one of those searing images that you get. I'm walking across the Roslyn Bridge and I'm looking to the south and I see the Pentagon burning, and it's like, to your point, it's like I think no matter where you were in the world that day, especially if you're a cop or military, you go, whatever I can do to your point, it's I'm going to do, how do I help? What can I do to help? Because again, it's like Israel and Hamas right now. Never again. We will never. That was my, like Bibi Netanyahu just said. He said our red line was October 7th. It will never happen again. Never.
Yeah, the only thing they can do is wipe Hamas off the map. That's the only thing they can do. It'll never stop. The head of Hamas himself said he wants to do 100, Octobers. He wants to do that over and over and over again. The only thing you can do is end these terror groups. These are radical Islamists, and nothing you can say, nothing. There's no secular solution to somebody who's literally willing to blow themselves up.
Only kinetic solutions. And by the way, how do you negotiate with somebody whose opening premise, just like the Hamas charter and everything else says, how do you negotiate with somebody whose opening premise is I want to kill you? Where do you take that discussion?
No, you can't. If somebody just wants to wipe you off the face of the earth, that's it. I mean, there's no negotiating. And now, not every Palestinian believes that. 80-something% in polling do, and agreed with it. But not everyone, and there are innocent people there, whatever. But honestly, Israel's doing more to protect innocent civilians than any country in the history of modern warfare. We've never seen anything like that. They could be using their air superiority, said they're going house to house and their own guys are getting killed, just trying to find terrorists that are hiding amongst
They'll lose 5 soldiers to save 1 innocent civilian. They're making that calculation.
No, they're doing it, and it's never happened before. If you look at civilian casualties in all of modern warfare, there's never been a lower rate than what's happening right now, and that's even when you're using the elevated Hamas.
Well, no, the Gaza Health Ministry is run by Hamas. Please, that's.
Yeah. If they wanted to stop the conflict, why don't they just release the hostages?
Yeah, they could do that. I mean, I can't think of another time when you have a terrorist organization that's doing this kind of thing and claiming they're going to keep doing it, they're holding American citizens right now,
Yeah.
And yet the world is saying, oh, we're being too mean going after them, right? Like it's never happened before. You got to think there's a lot of anti-Semitism.
Good thing you aren't on the ground over there, because somebody would be offended that you were yelling at them very aggressively, Jeffrey.
It's unbelievable. It's just unbelievable what's going on.
Well, again, this is we could do a whole nother podcast just on this. And I think a good issues podcast is something we ought to do sometime. But let's get into a little bit more of your story, because I like the way you framed it, because you said, never again, you're going to use whatever capability you had, skills you had, and which led you to going to Afghanistan. I mean, there's a couple of people we talked about, Khan Mohammed and Haji Nacho Bacho. Well, that's our new name for him, Nacho Bacho. Because Nacho friend.
He's a free man now. Be careful.
He is? God,
yeah,
he's out.
Unfortunately.
Well, let's talk about you, about transitioning your role and the things you're doing. So how did you end up in Afghanistan?
Well, I was just looking for ways to get into counterterrorism, and I truly believe DEAs and what we did just with the Joint Terrorism Task Force showed, right? DEA counter drug tactics work. And there's similarity between terror cells and drug units. They're all part of broader organizations, but sort of this amorphous, link chart. And then each one has its own autonomy, and each one has its own role. So it really translated. So I ended up going down as one of our liaisons to the Department of Homeland Security, and this is right after they were formed. And Tom Ridge was in the building, and I was in the ops center. So it's a room with representatives from all the federal agencies and a bunch of major police departments, and every single threat that was coming against the United States was coming into that room. And every day we'd get these huge binders filled with all the threats and all the intelligence. And, and we were going through, and you're supposed to look and see if there's anything you had on these people or whatever. I was running every telephone number. I was running every address. I was running every name. And immediately I started seeing links to DEA cases all over the world, because people don't know this, but I mean, DEA is in what is it now? 90 something about 90 offices in 70 something countries. DEA's human source network is unparalleled, and it's all over the world. And these are proactive guys. Like I used to argue with CIA case officers all the time, telling them, you guys are writing history books, and I'm trying to actually put people in jail because, you can get intelligence, but if you don't act on it, what the hell are you doing, right?
It's called history if you don't act on it.
Yes. Sometimes yes, you have to burn that source. Sometimes you just have to risk some things because you want to stop what's going to happen. And there's that's a mindset difference too between intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies, right? And we're both right, but we're just looking at it from different perspectives. So I get
it's a different mission, to your point, right? With the agency plan, what's the planning and intention of our adversaries, right? A lot of historical stuff. You want to go back and get the Mitrichin archives, the things like that. Historical stuff really gives you good insight into the plans and intentions of our adversaries. But when you're confronting an active threat right now, it's about kicking ass, taking names, knocking down doors, making progress. But again, it goes back to, like you say, I think one of the mistakes they made was trying to turn I remember after 9/11, I remember working with a lady. I was doing some work down at Justice, but ran into her, Maureen Baginski. She came over from NSA, and she was running the Russian desk at NSA, and she became the first executive assistant director in charge of intelligence for the FBI. And I agree that the FBI needs to be part of the intel community, but I don't think turning the FBI into an intelligence organization solves the problems we need here. They don't need to be a version of MI5. We still need an investigative capability. DEA brings theirs, ATF, Marshals. I like the intelligence piece. Trust me, I've dealt in that world too, but I think there's a time and a place for it. But when you're trying to stop things from happening, intelligence has a role, but it is not the price. Like, to your point, I like the counter drug way you put DEA, the way you framed it and stuff, because it really, at the end of the day, these terrorist organizations are like cartels. You need logistics, you need support, you need transportation. I mean, you got to have leadership. If you want to hurt an organization, take their money, take their leaders.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You got to cut the head off the snake. You got to hurt them whatever way you can. I mean, a lot of the intelligence strategy comes out of like the Cold War, right? So it's this long term, and it's economic, and it's diplomatic. But to be fair, I mean, the CIA after 9/11 changed a lot too, right? They killed a lot of terrorists. They did a lot of good things, but sometimes you still had that rift where they're developing intelligence but don't want to act on it because we must protect. And listen, protecting a source for a long-term goal is important as well. Even when we're for law enforcement, we're trying to, charge people with crimes. So we're using those sources so we can actually put people in jail. And I think, somewhere between those two things lies the answer, but there is a kind of a natural push and pull. And when I was with Department of Homeland Security as this liaison, I was seeing this stuff all over the world. So I'd pick up the phone and I'd call, El Paso, or I'd call agents in other offices, and I'd say, hey, you've got this guy. What do you have on him? And a lot of times they wouldn't even know it was terrorism related. Sometimes they did. DEA had some really good cases where they were putting a drug case together on a group that was supplying money to terrorists, or a group that was actual terrorists themselves. So I was getting that intelligence and passing it. And I started writing memos about how DEA could be more involved, and the things that we could do and what we bring to bear. And I mean, it's really impressive, and it's not just wiretaps for intelligence sake, but trying to actually put together a case and be able to, arrest people. And the fact was that DEA had their fingers in all these terrorist groups. Like at the time, I think there were like 60 something, maybe 61 designated terrorist groups, and about at least a third of them had some kind of significant drug connection, and DEA was involved with most of them. So I felt like we were leaving something on the table by not being involved. But I was getting a lot of pushback from DEA because it's a single mission agency, and understandably they were worried that they'd get sucked into the whole Department of Homeland Security, department. They wanted to stay as a single mission agency, but there were a lot of good people in DEA headquarters who understood the value that we could bring to this, and that it was our country at stake. And so that's what led me into it. And then when the DEA's Kabul country office was open. There were a couple TDY guys who went like towards the end of 2003. John O'Rourke went over as the new country attaché at the beginning of 2004, and I followed him. I don't know, maybe 6 weeks later or something like that. And it was like in April of 2004 I went over.
Well, funny we were talking about. There's like a certain number of designated terrorist organizations, certain number of high value targets you're going after. I remember when we had Derek Maltz on, his big thing when he was running SOD was I want his picture on my wall. It's like, we were talking Victor Boot and other stuff, right? So want his picture on my wall. I can just see Derek doing it now. You can hear that voice, 10 minutes before you saw Derek. I want that picture on my wall now. So
he's serious though. That's the thing.
He's serious.
Well, I got to tell you this. So my first day at SOD, my boss, he brings me upstairs and we're like, okay, you're going to meet the SAC. And Derek's giving me the spiel. He's great at this, right? He's a great guy. And then he says, and I've got these pictures up here and over there. And I told him, I said, you're going to need a bigger wall.
You had a friend for life.
Well, you know what? There is a play on a movie there. I think it was called Jaws. We're going to need a bigger boat. You're going to need a bigger wall.
Well, we just had Zach on here not long ago talking about Operation Cassandra and
Project Cassandra.
That's right. And who's the guy you mentioned that was the first TDY over there? You just mentioned his
John
name.
O'Rourke was the first permanent. Like he was a country attaché, and I went over as the assistant country attaché. Then we had a bunch of TDY guys who came in.
Yeah, so Zach said he was actually probably more involved in that case than Zach was. Working with Mossad. Good stuff, man.
John's a great guy. It's interesting because and you guys kind of touched on this too. So much of it is like doing that extra proactive thing, that extra traffic stop, right, that you mentioned. So much is personality driven, and that's why the personalities in DEA matter so much. These are guys who are just willing to get the job done. In the end, we got this guy locked up. We took this piece off of the chessboard, and John's one of those guys. He's just willing to get the job done.
Well, so let's talk about which came first. Was it Haji or Khan?
So and we did a lot of really good cases when we were over there. It was Khan Mohammed came first, but there was so when I first went over there, by the way, I was there 4 days, and my partner, who was a TDY guy at the time, was Tim Sellers. He was, I believe, out of the El Paso office. And he had developed a source as a TDY guy in Kabul, right? He's already got a source, and the source was telling him about a Hig crew, Hezbollah group that had killed a bunch of Germans at the airport at Kabul International Airport, and that they had a bomb factory and they were looking to kill people. And so it was like day 4, and I remember that Tim had set up a meeting between his source and one of these bomb manufacturers who was going to actually deliver an IED. And Tim was working with the International Security Assistance Forces, and Tim was out there surveilling it. And I wanted to be out there with them, and we tried, but the drug czar was in town, so we were at another agency's building with myself and John O'Rourke briefing the drug czar while Tim's out there running around with his source. And the short story, the International Security System Forces couldn't launch for a bunch of bureaucratic reasons, so Tim never did the meeting. So the next day we set another meeting, and Tim and I went out there to surveil this guy. This was like my fourth day, right, in Afghanistan. I'm like, oh, this is sort of drinking through a fire hose at this point. And we're out there, and we have a military convoy. It was the Canadians were in charge of ISAF, and we had a Norwegian Special Forces unit that was supposed to be like our quick reaction force to come in. So we have our sources, and they're supposed to meet with this bomb maker who's supposed to bring a bomb, an IED. And they're supposed to meet at this tea house. So we're out there, and we were using a source in our car who had another source who was meeting with the guy. So it's like the game of telephone, right? And we get the word, the guy's in the house. They're meeting in the tea house. So we launched the quick reaction force, and we jump out, and the Norwegians come. It's this huge military force, right? We hit the door. The Norwegians go in. We stayed outside, and our source is in there, but not the bad guy. So we're like, oh shit, right? And so we reconfigured. We got our other source out, and we found out that the bad guy with the bomb had seen the military in the area and hadn't come yet because he was concerned. So we threw a source in the car. We jumped in the car. We grabbed a Norwegian radio operator with us and threw him in the back. And we're driving through the streets of Kabul to try to find, and we locate this guy. And he's walking with our source down the street outside the Blue Mosque, which is this big mosque in downtown Kabul. And he's carrying the bomb with him in a sack, right? And he walks right behind us. And so we have the radio operator with us, and he's calling back, trying to get the convoy turned around to come help and to make this arrest. But they're on the other side of the Kabul River, and it's traffic, and they can't get turned around in time. So we're following him in our car, like way back, and we've got a big X on the roof of our car. There's air support up. There was a Apache. There was a Dutch Apache helicopter, which was up like providing air support. And so we call the U.S. colonel who's over there, and we're like, hey, we need to act on this. We need to go out. We need to stop this guy. We follow him to this big bus area where all the buses are lined up and people are going all over Kabul. And the guy with the bomb, I don't know if he knew the military was coming or what, but he was getting ready to board a bus. And so I'm in the back seat. Tim's in the front, and we have a Marine, a security guard who's there. Who's the counterterrorism security guy from the embassy, and he's calling in, and we're like, hey, we need to go, and the guy's saying, no, you're denied, you can't go, you can't do anything. And Tim turns around and he goes, so we're going? I go, we're going. He goes, oh, we're going? It was like we're having our own conversation. So Tim and I jump out of the car, right? And the last thing I remember hearing is the Marine guy going, yeah, they jumped out. Right? So Tim and I take off across the square, and Tim tackles this guy as hard as he can, and the bomb goes flying up in the air. And we land on him. We're fighting this guy, and he's strong as heck. He's a Pakistani national, right? He's part of this terror group, and he's trying to get into his pocket. And we're struggling with him. And there's probably 1,000 people around because the mosque had just let out, and they're yelling at us, and they're throwing bottles. Like they see two Westerners fighting with this guy, right? And so at one point, Tim's choking him out, and then the guy's coming back to him and fighting. And Tim goes, you got to shoot him. I can't get to my gun. So I pull out my gun and I put it against the guy's head. And as I'm doing this, a crowd goes crazy and they come in on us. And there's even cops, like Afghan cops, who are coming in. They're carrying sticks, and we're getting pelted with things. And I'm like, we'll get killed. I can't do this. And so I have his arm, and I'm holding this guy's arm, and there's like sewer water on the street, and he's slippery, and I'm fighting for it, but he's trying to get into his pocket. So we finally hold him up. The Apache helicopter hovers right over us, and with the rotor wash blows the crowd back. Like they're hovered right above us. And so they keep the crowd back. I reholster my gun. I get the guy's arm back out so he can't get whatever he's going for. And then the Norwegians finally come they get this big convoy turned around. It's certainly not their fault. They finally come, and they help us, and we get to take the guy into custody. Turns out he had the detonator in his pocket that he was trying to detonate the whole time. And this bomb's sitting right next to us. So,
how long from the minute you jumped out till you got help there to secure the guy, till the Norwegians show up? How long were you guys out?
It felt like exactly a year and a half.
I bet it did.
I want to say about 20 minutes. It might have been 15 minutes.
But still, that is a lifetime. 5 minutes is a lifetime when you're fighting somebody, much less 15. And then you've got a whole crowd around you. You have no idea. I mean, a lot of people over there didn't buy into the mission that we're here to help you. We're here to free your country from the Taliban, right?
Yeah, and there are people in the crowd who are also on the Taliban side. They're probably Taliban members as well. So yeah, no, it was hairy, and that was day 4. Welcome to Afghanistan.
Whoa.
You seem to have an issue. You get on a department. You're not on for very long before shit starts hitting the fan. So.
No, and that happened with a lot of the groups that I joined too.
I can everybody saying, "Oh, great! Here comes Jeff Higgins again. Things are about to go to shit."
Wow, I'm glad we're doing this interview virtually.
I don't know. Yeah, good thing I would have known that before showing up at your restaurant that night. I might not have shown up. Shit, what's going to happen now? Well, but what was the IED? What did he have?
It was like 3 pounds of plastique or something covered with ball bearings. It was the same bomb they'd use at the airport to kill all those people, and it was in a pressure cooker. I've got some great pictures of it. So then after we got him into custody, we went back to our source, and we're talking to him, and we find out where the bomb manufacturing facility is. So now that we actually have a bomb, we actually have a terrorist. Right now, the ISAF is really ramped up to do something. So the Norwegian Special Forces team. By the way, this was their first real world op for this since World War II, or at least that's what they told me. So they're going to hit the place, but they need our source. So Tim and I have to lead our source, right? We have to control the source to lead them. So we're having this briefing, and I remember it was dusk and it's getting dark, and we're at this compound. and we're all we're being briefed by I believe it was a captain from the Norwegian Special Forces team, and he's going through all the issues and all the problems that come up, and he says this really deep accent. He goes, "This could be a night of dark horrors." Which I think all DEA guys should use in their briefings.
I see that as the title of your next book, The Night of Dark Horrors.
Fantastic. And so we end up, Tim and I grab our source, and we end up going this convoy to like a really bad, like it sounds funny, a bad part of Kabul. It's a bad part of Kabul, like high crime, very anti-Western, right? And that's why the guys had their factory there.
I thought that was all of Kabul at that point.
Yeah, no, this one in particular, it was bad. And so Westerners didn't go there. So we're Tim and I have the source between us. We have our little MP5s, and we're walking in front, and we have the whole convoy of the Special Forces guys behind us. And we climb up this mountain, and we go. You know how it is with sources, right? They really have to be controlled. And this guy's terrified, and where he keeps wanting to turn around. So we're dragging him up the side of this hill, and he identifies the place, which we never would have found in a million years if we weren't with him and had him with us. And he physically goes up there, and I have him put his hand on the door to the bomb factory. I'm like, this is it. So we pull him to the side, and we call in the team, and the Norwegians hit it. And they ended up it's just this nightmare of a place filled with munitions, and I mean they found all kinds of, they found active bombs, bomb making materials, missiles, all this. They arrested, I want to say 13 or 17, it was in the teens.
So rewind real quick. When you say it was hard to find, give us an idea. Where was it at? What was it disguised? What did it look like if you were just walking down the street?
So an urban area in this really bad neighborhood, a lot of 2- and 3-story buildings, just kind of dilapidated, mud streets with open sewers running along the side. We're walking up at night. This is in the dark. And we're walking up, and it was down an alley that had blankets and things hung every so often in the alley. So it was covered from the top, so you couldn't see people coming in and out. I mean, it looked like a bazaar, right? And so we moved down this dark alley, and it's one of many doors. He never would have found it, but he hit it. The Norwegians went in there. They cleared the place without firing a shot. They arrested all these terrorists, but they had things like trip wires on the roof. They had doors that opened up into nothing. It was. I didn't clear it. These guys, hats off to them. They did a good job. So we ended up they made a ton of arrests here. So that was a really successful mission, and that was all based on Tim Seller's source.
Whew. But what you were describing sounds just exactly like a drug case. You get somebody who's kind of the tip of the spear, who's a dealer, right? You take off the dealer, take off his load, work him back up to the source of supply.
It's exactly right. And this is what I was pushing DEA for the longest time. And there were enough really good people in DEA management who understood this, and said, we just need to do this for the good of our country. And we need to try to get into these cases.
Well, just exactly everything. It sounds, like you think about working those cases, but it's like you're setting up meets. You got people, hey, we got to see what's your goods, right? You got to bring something to show me something, right? So he's bringing a bomb to show you, right? He's got to sell stuff to make money. These guys need money to operate. That's the other thing too. They're very logistically dependent. They need materials. They've got to have a supply chain, and they need to have money. I mean, this guy wasn't going to give this shit to you for free, right?
Well, and Jeff, tell us, during that time, what country in the world was the leading producer of heroin?
Oh, it was Afghanistan was producing over about 92% back in 2004 of the world's heroin. They had more hectares under poppy cultivation than anywhere in the world.
And the reason I pointed that out is that's why DEA is not only the terrorism connection, but it all ties in. And I'm sure you're going to explain a little bit more here too.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of high level. I mean, really, because I was the assistant country attaché, and when John was out of the country for going to a conference or whatever, I was the country attaché, right? So I had a lot of every day. I was in meetings with we had country team meetings at the beginning of the week with the ambassador and General Barno, but I had high level conversations with people at intelligence agencies. Let's just leave it like that, who said there's no connection between narcotics and terrorism. No, that was their position. And now it seems so stupid.
Sounds familiar.
So first of all, having done some training over in Pakistan, I do believe the ISI helped create the Taliban. The Taliban is a terrorist organization who may or may not have been involved in cultivating heroin to generate profits so that they could conduct terrorism. Am I in the ballpark here, Jeff?
Yeah, it's another clue, as you would say. So the Afghan Taliban wasn't even designated. The Pakistan Taliban was by the State Department. But those designations, I mean, they come and
They're
go. They're
political.
politically driven.
Yeah.
Like as you can see with the Houthis now, right? The Houthis, it's just whoever they want they need to not have designated. That's who they take off the list and they put somebody back on. But yeah, no, the Taliban, tens of millions of dollars they were generating every year from narcotics. They worked hand in glove with the terrorists. They worked with them on so many levels. Like I had actual like an Afghan commander who was selling drugs as a way to finance his terrorism. The first case, the Khan Mohammed case, was a guy who was both an Islamic terrorist working with the Taliban and also an outright drug dealer on his own right. But the levels, the drug traffickers worked in every way supporting the terrorists, and the terrorists protected the drug traffickers. They killed sources who were working with the government. A terror group like a Taliban cell would come in to do an attack. So they'd come through these mountain passes from Pakistan, and they'd stay at these heroin drug labs that are up in the mountains. They'd get their phones charged. They'd have ammunition and weapons pre-positioned. They had basically a Taliban National Guard, for lack of a better way to describe it, where people would come up and join them for these missions who lived in Afghanistan. Then they would hit their targets, and then they would use the guides from the drug groups to help them get back out of town. So they worked together all the time. And in response, in exchange for this protection that the Taliban was giving the drug groups were giving them huge amounts of money. And there's a zakat, which is like a religious donation, but beyond that, they were giving them.
Yeah, zakat. That when you talk about one of the pillars of jihad is actually zakat. So it's you have to give to the cause. What you just said sounds suspiciously. I got to tell you, because I'm authority on this, because this is the second time I've watched Narcos Mexico, but sounds very similar to me. Like some cartel boss over there running the plazas, and so if you want to move through my area, you got to everybody. It's like the mafia, right? Everybody gets their get.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the Taliban also relied on these drug traffickers to let them know who was cooperating with the government. The one of these commanders I mentioned carried a sword with him, and he would cut off the hands of people that were working with the government. I mean, this is kind of medieval stuff that's going on over there. But Kabul was crazy. Like that was I told you about my entree into it. I ended up doing the first undercover since before the Taliban, since DEA had been there in like the 70s, and but I did an undercover deal with a Pakistani warlord, this guy Misri Khan, who I negotiated for 500 kilos of heroin to be delivered to New York. This was a guy who had a dungeon in his basement in Pakistan, and where he held prisoners and people who owed him money and family members, so he could extort people. And I did a bunch of undercover meetings in downtown Kabul, and John and I worked to get the Afghan counter narcotics police up and running. Like when we first went there, you'd go to the CMPA, the counter narcotics police, and there'd be nobody there. There'd be the one guy, the colonel in charge, and nobody else. It took us, we had to find the cops, then we had to work with the Ministry of the Interior to get them armed. I mean, I was literally bartering and negotiating with people to get things so I could get them the weapons that they needed so we could even go out on missions and training them. And we had to teach them the law. Like they didn't understand evidence. They didn't know what that meant. You say, well, we want to arrest this man. Why? He's a drug dealer. Okay, what's our evidence? Well, everybody knows he's a drug dealer. That was literally their thing. Like,
okay, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't really hold up in courts, And so I ended up being the first Westerner to testify in the Kabul Public Security Court. And then when they stood up an Afghan Central Narcotics Tribunal, I was the first one to testify in that as well.
Jeez.
So we were teaching them how to do narcotics cases, and it started with a lot of like classic DEA cases, right? Ordering up drugs, getting a sample, doing a rip, ordering something bigger, arresting people in downtown Kabul, all the way up to we need to be able to exert power around the country. So we did convoys because we didn't have air support at the beginning. So we drove like up north, up to the Tajik border. We drove to Kunduz. We did operations. We drove down to Kandahar. We did these massive convoys so that we could bring the rule of law to other parts of the country. Then eventually the military started right, giving us the support we needed. And the State Department's INL section had a bunch of Hueys. So we had these great helicopters that they bring. So we did operations with them. We did operations with the military, worked with other foreign militaries. There were a lot of other units there. So in the end, I mean, there were a lot of different people in Afghanistan putting their lives on the line to try to make a difference.
Well, when you say that you were driving to Kandahar and Kunduz and Bagram and all the places, I've been to those places, Jalalabad. Those aren't places to drive to. You're going through Indian country from the time you leave Kabul till you get to the town you're going to. I mean, that's one of the most dangerous areas in the world back during that time.
Yeah, especially when you're leaving, right? If they don't know you're there when you hit a target, then you got to get back home,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so we'd stop at like police departments. We'd sleep on the floor where the cops are the ones actually moving the drugs. I mean, it was interesting. At the beginning, we didn't have a lot of support, so it was just kind of whatever we could put together. And I ended up I probably lived in Jalalabad, which is near in the Nangarhar province, which is where the Khyber Pass is. And it's a historically criminal province. A lot of like centuries of smuggling various things through there. And I lived with the Special Forces A teams for years. Like I think I had about 3.5 years in country over time. And, we used to go out on operations with them. We were I was in combat with the SEALs down in the Helmand province. We did a lot of really cool cases. I started with the Kabul country office, and then DEA formed our FAST teams, our foreign advisory support teams, which are basically tactical teams. And we go out and we go for these 4-month deployments. And initially there were 5 teams, and they consolidated a bit. But we go out and we'd send 2 agents to each of these areas in the country, and you go and you develop sources and you put cases together and develop evidence. And then we'd go out and hit them as tactical teams. Like I was our demo guy and our EMT, and we'd blow up labs, and we'd, with the goal of actually trying to arrest people and put them in jail.
Were you married during this time?
I was not to the same person I'm married now.
I can understand why.
That is also, actually it worked out really well for me. So
yeah, but when you show back up after 3.5 years and people are asking for your ID, okay, who are you, pal?
Yeah, I wish my wife she's the most amazing person I've ever met.
Well, I'm telling you, I had no idea how amazing she was that night. That when we were there, we get to talking a little bit, and I saw that book. I said, "Oh, that's an amazing book." And I think it was either you or somebody said, "Well, I happen to know who wrote it." And you go, "Who?" You go, "My wife." I go, "You're kidding me." So,
yeah, Cynthia Farahat. She's the world's leading expert on the Muslim Brotherhood. She's from Egypt. She had to flee. She had to seek asylum here because she was on Al Qaeda hit list. They captured and tortured her brother, got her on the phone to listen to it so that she would try to do what they wanted her to do during the Arab Spring and bring the protesters under control, and she refused.
Gosh.
She formed the first ever pro-Western secular political party in the history of modern Egypt. It was pro-Israel, pro-West. And, obviously that didn't go over really big at the time when the Brotherhood was running Egypt, but she's so brave. Like, it's one thing when you're carrying an M4 and, you've got grenades it's another thing when you're unarmed and by yourself and the government themselves is the enemy.
Is after you. And I got to tell you, so in case folks wanted, it's called The Secret Apparatus, the Muslim Brotherhood's Industry of Death. By the way, it's instructive to understand that in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the home of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, created the original Muslim. It is outlawed. It is a terrorist group in Egypt, but it is allowed here in the United States.
What's the name again?
There's a huge misunderstanding about the Brotherhood.
The Secret Apparatus. The Secret Apparatus. Cynthia Farahat, Farahat.
And that book is in their own words. She met a relative of Hassan al-Banna. She knows these people. She's been in debates with them, in Egypt. They called her the firewood of hell. That's how they introduced her at a big public debate. But the Brotherhood is the blanket organization for all Islamic terrorism, and that's Sunni and Shia. She goes into centuries of cooperation between Sunni and Shia and explains how the Brotherhood was a big part of that. She goes back to history. It's their own words. It's their own documents.
Well, and then you go forward from there, and there's another seminal work called Milestones by Qutb, Qutb. Anyway, but so a lot. I mean, just so much historical stuff. You know what I'm reminded of is it was a cartoon, Doonesbury, but he nailed it. You remember Duke, the CIA guy, kind of had the jacket, yeah. And he's talking to Mohammed or somebody over there. You know, they're in Afghanistan. So he says, Mohammed, why do you want to kill Ahmed? He said, because 2,000 years ago, his cousin killed my cousin.
Right. That's about how ridiculous it is.
Yeah, it's complicated, but this is the parent command and control for all Islamic terrorism. They formed Hamas. They're instrumental in Al Qaeda. Like every group, ISIS, every group you can think of, the Brotherhood has their fingers in, and they have different strategies. By the way, this is from their own words. Like the FBI, sees the memorandum from them in Northern Virginia.
Exploratory memorandum. If a seat from a basement, yes, here in Northern Virginia.
Right. And they openly will talk about, like in Europe, they're using immigration as a weapon of jihad. That is their strategy.
It's called jihad of the womb. There's also jihad of the womb. They will just outproduce you, and in 18 to 20 years, they will have people who vote in a certain way, and that they will outvote you.
Right. And this is their stated written strategy, right? And in the United States, they want to co-opt education and the media and the government. So you have open members of the Brotherhood who've been involved in terrorist attacks, briefing members of Congress. My wife has written extensively about this with profiles of these people and the actual evidence. If you want a reasoned argument that's just based on evidence with practically no opinion in it, get that book.
Yeah, and I've just looked up the name because you get that open loop. Syed Qutb, Qutb. It's called Milestones. It's a follow-on to Hassan al-Banna and the establishment of the Muslim Brotherhood. But I mean, yeah, look, again, there's a whole nother path. That would take us another, we want to talk. We'll talk to your wife about this.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
you should. She's brilliant.
Well, but I mean, but this goes back to exactly what you're saying is if you can't define an enemy, you can't defeat them. You got to be able to define the enemy first before you can defeat them. And this is why I think what you were doing over in Afghanistan was so important, because you defined the enemy, you defined what they were doing, which gave you a mission. You were able to now focus the mission, focus your resources, because you had an outcome. You knew what you were working towards and why. A lot of people will do the what, but guess what? Even with Americans, sometimes we want to know the why. Why are we doing this? Why are we spending blood and treasure? Because I go back to you and I were talking before we got started, but episode 22, Joe Piersante, one of your fellow DEA members on the FAST team, took a round through his head, through the side of his head, on one of the FAST deployments, and now he's a world record, bodyholder for his bodybuilder, for his age. But he was the same thing. He talked about what were they over there doing? Why were they doing this? You guys were so mission driven. I don't want, we're going to run out of time here before I want to run out of time. You know what we ought to do, Murph? I mean, we've got so much stuff. We ought to come back. Let's set a second episode. And if you wouldn't mind doing this with us, Jeff, and I think because we've got so much to cover, what I don't want to do is artificially cut off discussion simply because we got to hit, a time limit. Would you be open to doing that coming back when we finish up?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love talking to you guys. This is good stuff.
It is good stuff. I'm learning so much. You came on the job much. I came on in '87.
You're about to say much later than me. Hey, he was back when DEA was still. What was it called? The Bureau of Narcotics. Well, even way back before that.
Yeah. That was back when we were under Treasury.
Yeah. Back with Elliot. He was there with Elliot Ness. Yes.
Yeah, but these are so motivational. Listening to guys like you talk, and Zach said, "Hey, you want somebody good to talk to?" And I'd seen you. I sent you a text message. I'd seen you on Narco Wars. I think it was on Nat Geo, and I had no idea that you were involved in that. That's after I saw that on TV. That's when I reached out to Zach and said, "Hey, how do I get a hold of Jeff?" Well, then I looked you up in Africa, and that's where I got your contact. Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, Joe Piersante too. I mean, if you want to be inspired by somebody who just has a positive attitude and just wants to always get things done, that's a guy to talk to.
Episode 22, and he gets it done every day. Amazing. He hits the gym, he works out, he moves forward. Let's close off by talking about you, though, because I want to give you a little bit of time. You've got, like you say, some books out. So let's talk about your latest one that you have out here, The Forever Game. You can find it at jeffreyjameshiggins.com. So give us an idea. Tell us about The Forever Game.
So this actually it deals with artificial intelligence, which is kind of timely right now, right? So it's a DEA agent who's on a fast team, and his girlfriend is diagnosed with cancer. So he leaves DEA so that he can take care of her, and he joins his brother's firm where it's an artificial intelligence research facility on the little island of Cuttyhunk off of Massachusetts, and then scientists start dying.
What was the name of the island again?
Cuttyhunk. It's a real island. It's a little island. It's got like maybe 60 full-time residents year round, and it swells to a few hundred during the summer. So it's in the Elizabeth Islands, just south of, like, off of Falmouth. It's a beautiful little place.
Yeah, okay. We've been to we took the bus from the airport to Falmouth, took the ferry from there to go to Nantucket and to Martha's Vineyard.
That's right. So this is like when you were taking that ferry, leaving Woods Hole out in Falmouth, the islands that you can see going south, that's the Elizabeth Islands, and Cuttyhunk is the last one. It's this little island there. So that's where I set this research facility.
Kind of like Plum Island,
exactly.
Little research facility out in the middle of nowhere.
That Nelson DeMille book was fantastic. He's one of my favorite authors. That, and then was it The Lions Game? I believe it was that came after that. If people haven't read it, those are two fantastic thrillers. With John Corey, right? The NYPD kind of wisecracking.
Why does it seem like if you write a really good, authentic police novel or anything with cops, it's always a wise ass? I mean, there is no perfect cop, who's a rule follower, right, Murph? I mean, take a look at Narcos. Yeah, please.
I don't talk to you about that.
Well, I'll tell you the one thing they got accurate on Narcos is both you and Javi. Neither one of you followed your damn instructions because you were never supposed to leave the base, and yet here you were leaving the base all the time.
Well, not that we had any influence over Jeff here when he was in Afghanistan, not following orders, but hey, we get the job done, don't we?
Yeah, and honestly, it's just the nature of bureaucracy, right? The bigger these agencies get, the more mired in rules and regulations. And at some point you go, how about the taxpayer wants you just to accomplish a mission, and that's why you're there on the job. So, and especially when you're talking about like terrorism, right? Or the work you guys did, what you're going after people. These are a lot of lives at stake here. And in the end, I mean, again, not breaking rules or violating rights, but you nobody cares about the internal DEA policy that you might be violating to take a killer off the street.
It's funny. The DEA Academy this is our second year that they've started bringing Javier and I in 2 or 3 times a year to address the trainees and the diversion investigators, intel analysts, and even the state and local guys if they happen to be there. And when we tell them our stories, we have to preface it with, we're not telling you to break the rules, because the SAC's in there with you and you don't want to get him in hot water. Right. But it was funny because the last time we were there, one of the classes presented Javier and I with T-shirts. And it said, on the back of it, it says, "We broke policies, procedures, and rules every day. We never broke the law."
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love it. But that's true. I remember we had I was working with the GIPN, which is the French counter narcotics guys, and it's like their SWAT team that was in Afghanistan. And we had somebody to act on who'd been working with the Taliban, and it was a drug thing. And we ended, there was this whole procedure, and we had to send, like, I was acting country attaché at the time. We had to send something to Islamabad or whatever. So we sent something to him. I got a convoy, and we just took off, and we drove out into the hinterlands, to go after this. And I remember the regional director called me on my sat phone with our director who was in the assistant regional director who was in Pakistan, and I had to pull this convoy over in the middle of nowhere, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And yelling at me, and I told them, I'm here with the French. What do you want us to do? You want us to shut this thing down? We're here. And they're like, fine, go ahead, go ahead and do it. What I learned through all those years, though, is if you're successful, everybody just bathes in the glory of the mission.
Oh, yes.
If you fail when you're breaking rules, you're in deep trouble. So if you're going to do it, just be successful.
And you're all alone.
Yeah. Well, it's the old saying, success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. So.
Well, that first story I told you about wrestling the suicide bomber, right? That I later learned that DEA was going to bring me back and recall me because of what would have happened, but the military gave Tim and I an award. And then we ended up getting the Attorney General's Award for heroism, and the DEA gave us the Award of Valor for it. But the initial response was, we're going to pull these guys out because we can't have people taking risks.
Oh, you talk about going from hero to zero back to hero again. So
yeah, no, seriously. I had inspections came out, and they were just had it in for us, and they were writing they just went after us, right? With all these little violations. You don't have a separate safe for this. Well, we've requisitioned it, but they can't. It's Kabul. You don't have the right tabs on these folders. Can't you just go to Kinko's and have them made? Like, it's Kabul, you know? And we went, and I remember having the guys sitting there, and they're saying, you shouldn't be doing this. You can't be going after terrorists. You need to be going after drugs. I'm like, it's all related. I go, this is self-defense. And they're like, we're telling you to stop doing this. And I said, I'm not doing it. I'm just not stopping. And I told them, send me home if you want, but I'm not stopping. That's why we're here. And they obviously, there were inspections. They couldn't send me home, but they really went after us. And then I heard later from somebody who was in the room when they delivered the scathing report to us, the guy at headquarters who was reading it. I want to say that was Maltz. I could be wrong.
You could just tell that. Yeah, I don't like you. Get it the hell out of my office.
I don't. It might not have been, but whoever. I remember him taking it up, looking at him. They said, "This is bullshit," and he threw it right in the garbage. Right, because we were doing really good work over there. And in the end, cops are cops, and they understand our job is to go after the bad guys, and you do it however you can to get that mission done.
There is a historical perspective to what you just said. Are you familiar with the Duke of Wellington's letter?
No.
So it's basically, during the 1800s, he was trying to stop Napoleon, from marching on, and he's getting all of these things from headquarters. And you just got to read the letter. But basically, it's this brings me to my present purposes, which is to request elucidation of my instructions from His Majesty's government. He goes on, he says, I shall pursue either one with the best of my ability, but I cannot do both. One is to train an army of uniformed British clerks in Spain for the benefit of the accountants and copy boys in London, or perchance, or two, to see it that the forces of Napoleon are driven out of Spain. Basically, he's saying I can do one,
I love it.
But not both, so pick it. So he's basically, that was his FU in a very polite British way. If you guys haven't read it, it's the Duke of Wellington's letter back to the folks at back in England.
I can promise you I wasn't as eloquent in my responses. I can tell you just real quick. I had I was meeting a source, and I found a guy. We picked up a guy following us. Right, so we're in downtown Kabul. It's myself and Jared Gustin, an agent, and our source. And so we end up. We dump them out of the car around a corner, we get rid of them, and then we're heading back to the embassy, and now this car is following us, right? So we assume they're trying to hurt us. So we can't pull up to the embassy where you're stopped at a gate and you have to go through all these procedures because this guy could be a suicide bomber. We don't know what it is. So Jared and myself end up stopping him head to head in the middle of the street in front of the embassy, and we get him out at gunpoint, and the guy just comes at me, and I just, holster my gun, and I'm fighting him. So I'm wrestling this guy, just pounding him in the street right in front of the embassy. And we end up taking him into custody. We bring him to the side of the road. He actually stops breathing at one point because of the way he was lying, and I had to resuscitate him. They wanted the oh my God, the State Department, the deputy chief of mission. He kept wanting to kick me out of the country. This was one of the many times. After the bombing incident, he was telling me, "Oh, you guys are all cowboys and this and that." And then the ambassador, who was out of the country at the time, came back, and I was sitting there with John O'Rourke in front of him, thinking this is my last day in Afghanistan, and I'm telling him about the story, and he looks at us and he taps a desk for a minute, and he looks up and he goes, "You're a hero." And I'm like, "Oh, phew,"
Thank you, boss. Thank you, boss.
Yeah, but I forgot where I was going with this story, but it was so. Anyhow, this guy, we subdue him in front of the embassy. We end up searching him. He's got a Taliban identification card on him. In his phone and in his wallet, he's got contacts within the government. Like, this is a Taliban guy who was following us when we were trying to meet a source, right? I end up getting OPR ends up calling me in for a violation of the Mansfield Amendment, which is like, you're doing things without your host country's participation. So you're not allowed. We work in foreign countries under the auspices of those law enforcement agencies. We can't do anything unilaterally. But this was just self-defense, right? Like, we called the local cops. We called the guys we work with as soon as we can. So I remember they're sitting down and they go through their whole thing, and they turn on the mics, and they're like, okay, they start recording, and they go, okay, so this is agent so and so. We're here investigating Agent Higgins for a violation of the Mansfield Amendment. He goes, "Agent Higgins, are you aware of the Mansfield Amendment? And I go, Jane Mansfield? and the guy
She was a great actress. I'd love her.
And the guy, he just put his head in his hands and he went, oh, like
it's going to be a long day.
It's going to be a long day. So again, not as eloquent as the Duke of Wellington. But by the way, that guy, I went through the whole thing with him, the story with him, and he goes, yeah, you did nothing wrong here. He goes, this is bullshit. Like, don't, and they cleared us like right away.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
You just see though, Derek, if it was Derek reading that report of his, just that vein popping out the side of his head and that finger coming out,
Oh, he'd get me red faced. He'd be up walking around. He'd go jump on top of his conference table.
Derek was mission focused. There's a handful of guys I think about, and he's certainly one of them. Handful of guys that got the job
and
done.
If you see his constant, he's on Dr. Phil on a regular basis talking about the scourge, the dangers of fentanyl and what's going on there. He is a guy who is not. And did you see him in the congressional testimony where he basically gave one of the members of Congress kind of an FU in a polite way, and they had this whole. It was a great moment in the history of having hearings, because you could tell Derek. He said, "Yeah, well, that's kind of like what you said." And they go, "Well, you can't talk about a member of Congress that way." And Derek kind of like, "Yeah, whatever,"
It takes courage to strap on a gun and go after bad guys. It takes another kind of courage too to speak truth to power, and that's something Derek certainly did.
Well,
but
that's what your wife did too. That's the whole thing. They don't carry guns, right? They have their intellect, they have their wit, but they have a point of view. But that can be just as dangerous as somebody with the bomb, because they want to hurt you for it.
Yep. Yeah. My wife she got death threats every single night. She'd have people call up and tell her they were going to decapitate her and put her head in a freezer. And for years, she was like this. Egyptian intelligence bugged her house. They'd call her up and play back her private conversations in the house to her. We really, and you see this all the time now, people take the rule of law for granted here in this country. You can have any kind of danger. You can dial 911, and within a few minutes, guys with guns are going to come to save you. There isn't a country in the world that really has that. The cops in this country are doing something extraordinary in just having that rule of law where the government isn't the bad guy. Now, of course, there are exceptions to that, but in general, right? The government aren't the bad guys here, and so and I'm by the way, I'm libertarian, so I have my own issues with government, but but it's not like in Egypt, like under Morsi, where the Brotherhood is literally running the country.
But that's very well said. There's no place in the world like it is here.
Tell you what, you go to these places, you go to Pakistan, you go to Turkey, you go to some shitholes in South America and other places. You're always glad when you come back and land and you go, you know what? You may not like this, but this is not a perfect system of justice, but it's the best system of justice I've seen anywhere.
Yep.
Hands down.
50 countries.
People forget that. It's going to be a hard awakening for them if they keep destroying law enforcement.
And I'm looking at your books here, though, going, okay, I see a thread kind of running through some of these here. So, like, we've got the Forever game, which is Special Agent Adam Locke quits DEA. So there's a DEA one there. Then there's another book. I love it, To the Interrogation. I used to teach interview and interrogation. We'll have to talk about it. I taught out at NSA for a while. And then you've got another book, too, called Forsaken. Presumed dead and abandoned in Afghanistan, Army medic Samantha Norris must evade a ruthless Taliban commander. This guy didn't happen to have a spare IED that he was, throwing around in the marketplace. Did he?
He didn't, but I was our EMT on our tactical team as well, and so I wanted to do a little bit of both. And that's a fun book. I actually have written a draft of the sequel to that one, but I haven't pitched it.
I was going to ask you that. I've looked at your books here, so you've got a great list. You've got some novellas and you've got some historical books, right? But you've got like the Forever Game, Furious, Sailing into Terror, Unseen Evil Lurks Among Us, Forsaken, which is a novella. I noticed you haven't done a series yet. Do you plan on writing a series, or is it just going to be like you said, you're doing the sequel? But is it going to be a sequel, or are you thinking about doing a series kind of like what Mark Greaney did with The Gray Man?
Yeah, so that one, the Forsaken, I believe will be a series. I actually just sold a book. The first book's called The Havana Syndrome, and I sold it to Severn River Publishing, and that's a 4-book deal. So that'll be a series.
Who's going to be your protagonist in that?
It's an FBI agent in that one, so I'm excited about it.
Also, he's going to be really good at writing memos and waiting for approval from headquarters. No, just kidding. We have to make a joke. We have to make an FBI joke once an episode.
Of course. I mean, I got to tell you that. I mean, I worked with some great.
We all
FBI
have, yeah,
absolutely.
And by the way, some of those HRT agents are studs.
Hey, good friend of mine, Michael Miller, is the chief of police down in Colleyville, where they had the guy that came in and held all those people hostage in the synagogue down there. And he talked about it. I mean, I chatted with him real briefly, but he's like, but when I'll tell you what's one thing's impressive about the FBI, you talk about, but even after 9/11, after the Trade Center bombing, Oklahoma City, when they get things rolling and they bring stuff in, they can bring more toys and more people. And they brought in HRT down in Colleyville. And I mean, these are the ones you want. These are the guys you want, the people who eat and live this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is what they do.
It's a struggle on a lot of levels, right? And it's the people who understand that and the life and death nature of it. Those are the guys you want out there.
Yep.
Well, you guys we're going to have to bring this part to a close because there's so much we could go to for a part 2. So Murph, you're on the hook for this. You got to schedule us a part 2, but you got to go to JeffreyJamesHiggins.com, get his books, get his latest one, The Forever Game. Because it's got a really, neat plot twist. Like I like AI, and it's funny too because you wrote your book about the same time I think Mark Greaney was writing his book, kind of also about AI. You guys have different takes on the use of AI, but
yeah, it's a lot of fun. And Mark's book's great too, by the way. If people haven't read that Gray Man
Chaos
series,
Agent, yeah.
Yeah, and even not just he has some standalones too that are fantastic.
Yeah, well, and Ryan Gosling, who was on the Oscars last night singing his song about Ken, Ryan stars as the Gray Man in the movie, and actually got renewed. So he's got a second installment of the Gray Man coming out on Netflix at some time.
That's nice. Great. I've read the books, but I haven't seen that one yet. But I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
All right. Well, look, hey, by the way, if I come visit, no offense, if you see me come in and I've got my plate carrier with some extra mags and an M4 strapped across my chest, I'll try and leave the Kevlar helmet in the vehicle though. Is that okay?
Do whatever you need to do to feel comfortable.
Well, it'll probably, if that happens, it'll probably be Halloween. Okay.
I'll dress up like a special agent in charge from DEA, Murphy, and not show up to the office. And
there you go.
Oh, by the way, if any of your listeners are authors and they have a book coming out and they want to celebrate it, reach out to me, Jeffrey at JeffreyJamesHiggins.com, and I'll find a time. We'll get you in there and we'll do an event for you.
Well, and also give them the website for Elaine's.
It's Elaine's, no apostrophe, Elaine's-restaurant.com. And they reach out to me at JeffreyJamesHiggins.com, and I'll do all the scheduling for that, and we'll find a time to get you in there.
Well, the reason I say go to their website, go to their restaurant site, because you can see some of the list of stuff that's coming up, some of the things that you've got going on there, which is how I found out about it. So.
Yeah, we've got it. We've a ton of authors coming up. I'm doing one tomorrow. I did one yesterday. We have a lot of really good stuff. Very good.
And they got good food and good wine and good beer, actually. I'll give you credit for that, too. Some good beer. So,
thank you. We just got Harpin, too. So we do the black and tan now.
Yeah, black and tan. All right, there we go. Harry, hey, well, look, Jeffrey, hey, by the way, first of all, thank you for all the service you've provided our country. Thank you for the work that you've done. This is us saluting you and to your wife, too. I've got the book. She signed it for me and gave me my own personal autograph of hers here. So I trust me. What I treasure is the fact that folks like you put it on the line for us for so long. And but seriously, appreciate this. But we'll have to come down, have some good food, and come to see you the next author. And I'll tell you, I'll take you up on your offer too, because when I get this done with Ryan, get all this stuff done, I'd love to come down. And you did a great job. You might have had some experience interviewing and interrogating people in a past life. So.
Yeah, I love the author interviews. They're really a lot of fun.
And you had some. I will tell you this: you had some good questions. They just weren't. Oh, tell us about growing up. Who was your inspiration? You actually asked some really good probing questions that made Mark have to think about it. So that was a great job. All right.
That's the mark of how good the interview is, in my opinion. Right? If I make the author think, then we're having fun.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, you don't go anywhere. Everybody, we will have part 2 of this coming out as soon as Murph gets off his ass, gets away from the beach. Gets a real job.
I can do this from the beach. I am doing this from the beach.
You are doing this from the beach. All right. Well, you guys don't go anywhere. Everybody else, stay tuned for the debrief. Hey players, as you can see, we made a command decision to bring Jeff back for another episode. So this is the end of part 2, but part 3 will be coming out next Monday. In the meantime, head on over to Apple, Spotify, hit those 5 stars. Let us know what you think about it. Leave your comments. We truly appreciate the comments, and it helps us improve. Also, head on over to GameOfCrimesPodcast.com for more information about the show. That's where you'll find a link to Jeffrey's website and his books as well. We update it as we go along. Also, follow us on that thing they call social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram, but also join us, patreon.com/Game of Crimes. We have a ton of content we put out there, everything from 911, what's your emergency, to you can't make this shit up, to Q&A, to our review of some of the most fascinating movies out there. So make sure you join us there. In the meantime, stay tuned. Part 3 of Jeff Higgins and Tales from the DEA will be coming out next Monday.